One of our main achievements here in Israel was a cabinet decision on January 1st, 2017. It had 3 points. No families are allowed to visit Hamas terrorists in jail. No Hamas family member will get medical care in Israel. And the third one was that no body of terrorists will be returned without precondition return Hadar and Doron. A month ago, 50 prisoners, including the manager of Shifa hospital, were released to Gaza. 2 days ago, there was release of 80 bodies of terrorists. We went to the Supreme Court. So they blame us that this is immoral. I say, look, these are Israeli cabinet decisions that are ignored.
Shalom and welcome to State of a Nation. I'm Elon Levy. Leah Goldin was the victim of a ceasefire. Not during this war in Gaza, I mean back in 2014 when Hamas dragged Israel into another brutal war. The story of Leah Goldin should be a cautionary tale for anyone naive enough to think that Hamas's terrorist army will respect a ceasefire. For 10 years, Hamas has been holding Leah Goldin's body. For 10 years, his parents Simcha and Leah have been fighting to bring him home. And when the October 7th hostage crisis erupted, hundreds of other families suddenly joined the Goldins' nightmare. Suddenly there were 255 hostages in Gaza. 251 from October 7th and 4 from before the war. Leah Goldin and Oron Shaul, both fallen soldiers, and Avera Mengistu and Hisham Asayed, civilians held hostage in the Hamas terror dungeons. The story of Leah Goldin is especially personal for me. We were born just a few months apart. He spent some of his childhood in Cambridge, where I had just finished studying when Hamas started the 2014 Gaza war, and I went into the army just afterwards. We could have been friends. We should have been friends. My guest today is his mother, Leah Goldin, who has been fighting for 10 years for closure and a dignified burial. Fighting the world to bring her son home and raising a red flag. Israel and its allies failed to use the right leverage to force Hamas to release her son's body. Instead, Israel thought it bought quiet that exploded on October 7th. And they're making the same mistake all over again with the 100 plus hostages still trapped in the Hamas terror dungeons. Today's episode is with a mother turned freedom fighter, fighting to free her son's body and to give him the burial that they all so desperately deserve. Welcome to State of a Nation.
Breaking news out of Israel this morning.
Shocking hostage taking.
Hundreds of Israelis are dead.
I want to bring in Israeli government spokesman.
What happens when the 4-day pause?
How do you resolve this?
Where does this go?
Leah Goldin, welcome to State of a Nation.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
You're sitting here wearing one of the hostage dog tags, except the hostage dog tags that most people wear say, "Bring them home now," and "Halev shelanu shavoi ba'aza," our hearts are trapped in Gaza. And I can see that yours is a little bit different. What does it say on your dog tag?
Yeah, you mean that?
Yeah.
It says Birkat Kohanim. I don't know how to say it in English.
The priestly blessing.
Yeah. Actually, I've got this from an artist from Jerusalem about 2 years ago. He prepared this for me with dove, and it's not the usual one. It has nothing to do with the current tags.
But it has the priestly blessing.
Yeah.
With its blessing for peace and God's protection and an image of a dove.
Come home safely, go in safely. I don't know how to translate it.
And what does it say there on the bottom?
On the bottom, it says, V'shavu banim ligvulam.
And may our sons return to their borders. Leah, we're filming this episode 10 months since the worst day of our lives, the October 7th massacre. And for the families of the hostages still trapped in Gaza, it has been 10 months of the worst day of their lives. But for you, I imagine that worst day of your life was August 1st, 2014, when your son, IDF officer Leah Goldin, was killed by Hamas terrorists, abducted into Gaza, and they are still holding on to his body, despite your best efforts to raise international awareness and generate political pressure in Israel. And then suddenly, October 7th happens, and there aren't 4 hostages in Gaza. We have 251 just from October 7th. Tell me what you've been doing for the last 10 years to try to bring your son home.
Yeah, we are now at the 10th anniversary since Hadar was abducted and killed. And it was actually 2 hours after ceasefire was initiated by the United States, at that time John Kerry, but the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, supported by the European Union. And this is very important to mention, since October 7 was actually also a ceasefire situation. Now, what we've been doing, in a simple sentence, we've been struggling to bring Hadar home to Kever Israel.
For a burial in Israel.
For a burial in Israel, as it's mandatory and as our obligation as family to bring our son to decent burial according to Judaism and according to all religions. Now, facing the Israeli attitude towards hostages after Gilad Shalit, we realized that the whole system here in Israel is paralyzed. It's paralyzed from the fact that more than 1,000 sentenced terrorists were released at the Gilad case. And the saying no release of terrorists actually was put into our face without any continuation. I mean,
what do you mean?
It means that we understand that terrorists should not be released. This is wrong. This was our opinion at the Gilad Shalit time, and it is.
You object to a release of living terrorists?
It is mandatory to return our soldiers home. In our case, it's Hadar Goldin, sent by the IDF, by the Israelis, to fight the Hamas after they launched thousands of missiles all over Israel, and their job was to destroy the underground terror tunnel. So no soldiers are left behind. Is the Israeli ethos, it's the IDF moral value, and for all the Israelis and the Jews, it's arvut adadit, the mutual
sense of mutual responsibility to each other.
And talking about deceased, it's our most important mitzvah, to bring our son to decent burial. So all of this, we realized, is not in place. All that we are hearing are political interests, either political interest or business interest. I mean, nothing is about values. And this is for us, after 2 years of sitting and not doing anything, because we were promised that there is someone taking care of bringing Hadar home. And just for the record, there is another soldier, Oren Shaul. The same war, he was also abducted by
just
Hamas
a few days
and
earlier,
considered to be dead. And later, two citizens, Avera Mengistu, Hisham Asayed, that crossed the border. And afterwards, it was said they are mentally ill. So all we are talking is 4 hostages defined as humanitarian cases. Now, we realized that after 2 years, when there was an agreement between Israel and the Turkey about the Marmara
the Mavi Marmara incident, right? When Israeli commandos stopped what the Turks claimed was a humanitarian aid flotilla had in fact a large number of armed activists who attacked the soldiers when they came on board. A number of them were killed, and Israel offered some form of compensation.
Yeah, which is wrong by itself, okay? However, at that agreement, there was the issue of putting the return of Hadar and Doron as a precondition to any goodies transfer from to Gaza via Ashdod port. Now, we knew about it, we were told about it, and we were waiting for that. However, a couple of days before that, we got a telephone call from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, telling us that this is not going to happen because this is against the interest of Israel and it will damage the international relationship of Israel.
I just want to be clear on where we stand. You're saying that as part of the agreement with Turkey, there was supposed to be a clause in which the transfer of goods into Gaza through Ashdod would be conditional on the return of the bodies of the hostages. That was part of the talks. And then you get a phone call from the Prime Minister saying that the national interest supersedes that.
It was deleted since it damages the interest of Israel.
In reconciliation with Turkey.
So this was
which is now threatening us with invasion.
So this was a huge disappointment to us, to our family, the Goldin family, and for the Shaul family. 2 months later, the Herzl Shaul just passed away out of heartbreaking. Okay.
Oron Shaul's father.
Yeah. And he was a Likudnik, and he was a friend of Netanyahu. So for him, it was awful for the family. Now, so at that point...
I just want to understand, you're saying for the first 2 years, you believe that the state of Israel really is committed to doing everything to get them back. But at this point, you begin to sense that maybe there are some political, and you say, which is really disturbing for me to hear, business interests.
It's more than that. Because when we started, complaining, we were accused of two families. There was a post at Facebook by Benjamin Netanyahu stating that we are two families, the Shaul and Goldin, that actually act against the interest of the Israeli state. So it's more than that. It's understanding that we are against each other. It's not that the government is actually working and doing and active in bringing my son home.
When you say there were political and business interests that mitigated against a deal, an operation to return the bodies of Hadar Goldin and Oron Shaul, what do you mean?
What do I mean is there is a famous book written by our Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu about how to deal with terror. And one of the most famous phrases is give and take. If you give, you will get. If you don't give, take. Itnu yekablu, lo itnu, lo yekablu. And what we see looking at the Gaza border is what is getting in and what are the presents that Gaza is receiving. Now we are talking immediately. It starts immediately after Operation Protective Edge, okay? And it continues. And it continues, you see thousands of lorries are getting into Gaza, a lot of initiative, high-tech initiative. We meet the people that are behind those initiatives, an initiative to build hospitals. We go to meet Gadi Eisenkot, at that time Chief of Staff, and saying, look, Hadar was kidnapped to a hospital. So how can you live with the fact that you build a hospital without requesting the return of Hadar and Doron? And the initial reaction, no, you don't know what you are talking about. Nothing is happening. But it's happening. It's there. There are, I think, two or three hospitals already there, built after Operation Protective Edge.
Because Israeli policy was to say...
Energy industry.
Because Israeli policy was to say, we think that if we provide some avenue for economic development in Gaza, and people see they have something to lose, that will deter Hamas from launching another attack or another war. That was the conception that was in place until October 7th. We'll let more concrete in, build more hospitals, improve the humanitarian situation. That will give them something to lose, and therefore they will not want a war. And you're saying that, in fact, that interest in trying to preserve quiet by improving the economic situation in the Gaza Strip, that policy was a mistake?
I'm not saying. October 7th says that. I don't have to say that anymore. I've been saying that for the last 10 years, as we also reiterated that if you feed this monster is actually a terror organization, a terror ideology that keeps shooting on the south and keep with the terror acts, you know. Although the Israelis are trying to low down, the voice of what's happening in the south. And I don't have to repeat it now after October 7. October 7 is a proof that all of this conception, and it was a conception, is a huge bluff. It's a huge bluff that energizes business. Because what we did, we did a lot of things trying to open this discussion, and we went to the Supreme Court, based on the humanitarian law, because this is our right to have Hadar back as a precondition or as a confidence building to any agreement with Gaza. This was actually declared on 2019 at the UN Security Council.
And I want to get on to this discussion, and we'll open that up.
Having that and having all the meaning of what's happening, we went to the Supreme Court. It's still there, asking what is the level that Israel is responsible to provide Gaza, and what is the limit? And
what is the legal minimum of Israel's requirements to be compliant with international humanitarian law?
And so we know. So in order to understand, when is my son requested to come home, or when he will be back? And of course, we didn't get any response. And by going to the Supreme Court, we got a lot of information. And part of it, it's like, how many cars on 2021 or 2022 new cars entered Gaza?
How many?
Thousands.
Thousands of cars.
Thousands. And these cars are not for the poor people to feed them and to feed and care and give them medicine. They go to the Hamas leaders,
Yeah, that's definitely not humanitarian aid, is it?
It's not a humanitarian aid, new cars. And you have a lot of goodies that you can know. And of course, there are a lot of open files at the UN repositories that you can find more about what's going into Gaza and what is coming back to Israel. You have all those income of goodies like strawberries and tomatoes that goes to the IDF soldiers, and we've got pictures about tomatoes coming from Gaza while the south is burning. It's burning by the kites and by the explosive balloons. So all the farms in the south are kaput.
Oh, that's fascinating. I mean, I'd never actually thought of it from that perspective. I remember when I was in the army and I served in Kargat after the war, and part of the policy was if we increase exports from Gaza to Israel, you give them an income, you give them something to lose. But at the same time that we're importing agricultural produce from Gaza, they are setting fire to fields in the south of Israel and destroying the livelihoods of Israeli farmers.
And who will get the taxes from this sailing? It goes to the Hamas.
Yes.
At the end of the day, we already all know since October 7 that this underground terror tunnel were not built on nothing. On nothing. And it's well known that 70% of what went into Gaza went to the Hamas. I mean, these are data. This is data that is open for the public. And now,
not just because of what it was able to cream off taxes inside Gaza, also the way it was able to embezzle humanitarian aid that came via UNRWA. The New York Times had a fascinating investigation that explored how UNRWA insists on paying its salaries in dollars and not in the local currency, because then they would have to use Hamas money changers. Hamas money changers would take commission that goes straight into their coffers that funded the war machine that perpetrated October 7th. And Israel was feeding into this system in what was ultimately the mistaken belief that this would buy us quiet. That came, you're saying, at the expense of the necessary leverage to get your son back. And I just want to understand,
I'm
because
not sure it's a mistake.
Oh, go
I'm
on.
not sure that it's a mistake. It's something
Because you just said that
well
October
planned.
7th
Because October
showed the
7th.
conception was a mistake.
No, the whole concept,
Yes.
while you say it's a mistake, you cannot say about a concept that is a mistake. A concept is something well planned. It's well planned and well continued while you ignore facts. You ignore facts. I mean, the most annoying thing, the last one, was when, and it went on with different prime minister, even Bennett. Bennett was worse in all of the giving to Gaza. And then the worst was when
Which Israel was
Gantz,
very proud of, by the way, as showing, look how many workers we're bringing into Israel. We're improving the humanitarian and economic situation, and this explodes in our face.
Now, about those 20,000 workers from Gaza per day, and each one of them came in for 3 months. So it's huge number of workers that now we know they all collected intelligence to where to kill and what to do. So, and I, at a certain point, at a very bad day, I did some calculation asking who is earning money from the 20,000 workers per day. And I just calculated, if you get one shekel per each worker, it gets you to 20,000 shekels per yom. Then multiply that by 25 days a month, and then add to this, all the expenses every worker before they start working. You get to I don't know how more than 100 million shekel per month. And my question is who is paying taxes for that?
And now you understand where Hamas got the money from
for
the terror tunnel network. No, but how Hamas
I'm talking about the Israeli side.
So what you're saying essentially is there was an interest on the Israeli side in the quiet that was extended in Gaza and kicking the can down the road instead of reaching some sort of using leverage in order to get Hadar's body back.
No.
If I understand your analysis correctly.
You understand very well, because that's
disturbing.
what we kept saying. We don't ask you to stop food. We don't ask you to stop humanitarian aid, whatever is needed to help people survive, But whatever you give above that,
beyond our legal obligations,
beyond that, you should request the return of my son. Now, the most upsetting thing is when the Qatar started provide money, cash money.
Famous suitcases full of cash.
And we went to the European Union and we met friends of Qatar. And I was asking that lady, do you think that for $50 million per month, I can ask to return my son? She said, certainly. But it's not the problems of the Qatars. She said, no one is asking for your son.
No one is asking. And this is the point at which you begin to think, or you've already begun to think, that the Israeli state is not using all the leverage that it can to get Hadar home.
To say the least.
I want to understand, because there are now hundreds of families who have been plunged into the same battle that you have. Been fighting for 10 years. And after years of fighting this battle, not by yourselves, there are the Shaul and the Mengistu and the Assad families as well. Suddenly 251 new hostages. And you discover overnight that there are hundreds more people in the same situation as you. Now, I remember in the early days of the war, when we were counting how many hostages there are in Gaza, people referred to the number of hostages taken on October 7th. And that number was still in flux because we didn't know who exactly was taken, who was missing. They identified bodies. In fact, just yesterday, which is horrific, they finally identified the remains of the last missing person in Gaza, Bilha Inon. Took 10 months to identify her remains and confirm that she was in fact killed on October 7th and was not taken hostage. But I remember that originally people were speaking about the number of hostages as if there was just October 7th. And then it took a while until the Hostage Family Forum put out a clarification saying, from now on, please refer to the total number, including the 4 hostages from before October 7th. And at the Prime Minister's office as well, we adjusted the messaging as well to use the total number. Take me a little bit behind the scenes. What is happening in the first days of the war when we find out there are hundreds more people in the same situation, and your struggle to fight to bring Hadar home and to get attention is now being drowned out by hundreds of other people fighting for the same thing?
Yes, it's crazy.
What happened there in the early days?
It's crazy. First of all, let me tell you about what's happening on Simchat Torah, October 7. At 10 a.m., my son, twin brother over there, is calling us. We were in Jerusalem, calling us. I'm going to recruit now to Miluim. And
what does he do in reserves?
He's Maglan. He's special unit. And
Kol hakavod, honestly.
Yeah, and he's calling us with a request. Mom, father, mother, we should now work to gather all the families that have kidnapped people, the kidnapped families.
This is as the kidnappings are still going on.
It's Simchat Torah, 10 a.m.
Most of the hostages haven't even been abducted yet.
Yeah. But we realize that there is a lot of abductions going on.
We are in a live hostage-taking incident.
His call is saying, I'm going to Miluim, but it's your job now to organize all the families together so no family will go alone as we did for 9 years. This was his command. And as usual, we start working. So by Motzai Chag, on the evening, we went to with a press release, Actually, we joined forces with Psagot Institute for trauma, and they provided 2,000 volunteers. So starting from October 7 night, we had a call center open for all those families to call us, trying to help. By Monday, we had 622 people calling us. And we have the list of 622 families, which eventually became the infrastructure of the family forum that was actually established on Tuesday. Okay, so this was our activity. So you can understand that for 3 days, we were not sleeping. All the families was on phone, trying to connect. We didn't realize that nothing is working, We tried to connect to the field itself, to the army, to whatever we could.
Total disarray.
Yeah. So then a week, by the end of the week, they started counting the number of hostages, while it was 199. Suddenly I said to my husband, Simcha, is Hadar included? And he was looking at me, he said, I don't know. So what he did immediately, he texted to the IDF, one of the higher levels, asking, is Hadar included in your counting? And the answer was no, this is another war. You understand that? So of course, from that time, for a couple of days, we've been kicking walls, all over. The IDF, the whatever, it was not there, Gal Hirsch was not there yet. All of the relevant people saying, this is unacceptable. We are the leaders of the hostages' families. We are the veterans. No way you don't include the 4 in this counting. So that was the turning point when the IDF spokesman, Danny Hagari, started to say specifically this number includes Hadar, Oron, Avera, and Hisham. So I don't know. You may say this is a mistake. I don't know. This is to all that, to add on all that we had during the 10 years, following the conception of silence. I don't know how you say sheket in English.
Quiet.
But,
not peace.
But saying quiet in English is not like saying sheket in Israel.
Why is that?
It's different.
Why?
In Israel, sheket is shut up. It's shut up. It's silencing. Sheket is silencing, is more than saying just quiet.
And what Israel was hoping was that by allowing Qatar to send money to Hamas, by allowing the economy to grow, by sending in these cars, goodies as you call them, we would buy sheket, silence.
Look.
And we could just park this problem to one side.
Look, buying sheket is wrong. You don't buy sheket from terrorists. This is wrong. We've been saying it along the 10 years. No terrorist. Everyone will laugh at you. What do you mean sheket? For them, the ideology to kill us and to kill others is so profound. It's funny. It's even funny to listen to the buy sheket, to keep quiet and provide the money, and this will make them they will turn to be good people. It doesn't work. It's a paradox. And I don't have to, we've been shouting our heart, to say this is not normal. And my husband, Simcha, is a professor of history. He gave them so many examples from history about the wall, that no wall stopped any invasion since the Romans. And, he went back to history. But, it was like a wall. This term quiet was like a wall by itself. Even when they claimed that when the Hamas were shooting missiles over the south, and they ignored it. And we said, okay, now you have another round of war, so it's time to request our soldiers, Hadar and Ron. And say, no, it's just being quiet. And while we were looking at the international papers to see how in English they translate the word quiet related to stop shooting, it was ceasefire. Mm. Now, this actually, as we speak, it repeats itself. Talking about ceasefire is something, the most important, it's the cherry of laws of war, So on one hand, Hadar was abducted and killed during a ceasefire. Now, we have another war and another war, and October 7 is formally a war. And yet, they use different words here in Israel in Hebrew, working hard to avoid the word ceasefire. Even once I heard the word atzirat esh,
Stopping fire. Ceasing fire.
It's ridiculous.
Right.
And all of this is working hard to keep what they've been doing along the years, keep business with Gaza.
And so I'm wondering what you think Israel should have been doing over the last 10 years. And I know you're not a geostrategist. You're a mother who wants her son back. On the one hand, you want to put pressure on the Hamas terror regime to release the hostages, the body of your son. But at the same time, it sounds like you are so skeptical of the thought that there is any way that Israel can live with the Hamas terror regime as its neighbor and reach any sort of accommodation with it. And so I'm wondering, do you think that at the same time as trying to pressure Hamas to give your son back, Israel should have launched a preemptive campaign to topple the Hamas terror regime before October 7th?
Yeah, living in accommodation with Hamas, I think that now after October 7, it's not a question anymore. They are our enemy. And as we speak, as we are fighting, as my family and the Israelis are fighting these terrorists, they are our enemy. And there is no way to talk about accommodation on any other friendly word of peace. So at this point of time, we have to fight and get to a ceasefire, which is the things that you create between two enemies. This is to begin with, okay? Now,
in order to facilitate the return of the hostages.
Yeah, for hostages, and the first thing to do after you have a ceasefire, first of all, to return the deceased, not bodies, the fallen soldier and the murdered one, the one that are not living. This was done in history since day one, you know. After a war, you return the deceased. The deceased are not a bargaining chip, okay? This is to begin with, looking at history and looking what should be done immediately. Now, the next thing is actually to create an international coalition, because the whole world is calling us for a ceasefire.
They treat the Hamas as if it's our problem.
And
alone.
for us, the Israelis, and I have 5 families members that are now involved in the current war. So for us,
as if you didn't have enough things to be worried about.
We all want ceasefire. So this is not a question. But talking about ceasefire means, to begin with, the hostages will be returned by agreement. By agreement, it's a ceasefire agreement of a ceasefire. And when you talk about ceasefire agreements, they usually contain more than the hostages themselves. You don't just talk about terrorist release. You talk about a whole agreement that will help those two entities stop firing and release ourselves from this war. And this is mandatory according to the international humanitarian law.
But ultimately, you're saying the Hamas terror regime must go one way or the other.
It's not Hamas. I'm not trying to change the Hamas. We should approach all those enablers of the Hamas. I mean, that's why I'm calling about the international coalition, because Hamas wouldn't exist 1 minute or 1 hour during the last year that we are fighting for that. Will not exist without the international community support on every subject. And while I'm talking about the international community support, I'm talking, of course, about Qatar, Turkey, those Islamic world supporters, terror supporters directly. But I'm also talking about the European Union and the donors, countries' support under the humanitarian law. You know, they all are responsible to return my son as a confidence-building measure to any agreement according to the humanitarian law.
Are you saying, if I understand you correctly, you count the European Union as among the enablers of the Hamas terror regime?
Of course. Of course. Having October 7 doesn't need an explanation. And knowing that 70% what enters to Gaza via those humanitarian organizations like UNRWA, like others, 70% went to the Hamas. They know it. It's published. So I'm using the word enablers to make it more soft. Okay? But I would like to let you know that during our journey, I think it was, we appeared at the UN Security Council on December 2017. And on June 2018, we had a special hearing at the European Parliament when they first had the resolution. Among a whole list against Israel, they called to the Hamas about the violation of the international humanitarian law while not returning Hadar and Ron and Avera and Hisham, and called for the immediately and unconditionally return of them to Israel, to the families.
And I remember just in January, the European Parliament passed another resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, given that
provided
there is no more Hamas terror regime and the hostages are returned.
Now, the people at the European Union and in the States, they were quite positive without. We even met the General Secretary, Guterres. We met him 3 times during this, after this.
What was your impression?
He said, I will actually talk to those UN state members, leaders, explaining their responsibility, okay? But whenever we got to some international, some country, and it was, the first time we got it was the British ambassador at the United Nations. He said, why are you coming to me? Go to your prime minister.
We've opened up a lot of issues that I want to dive into. And you mentioned this very important point about building an international coalition against Hamas and pressuring its enablers, among whom you include the European Union because of the way that it has been funneling trade and aid into Gaza and propping up the Hamas regime. But before we do that, I just want to go back to something you said, because the question of how we frame this situation and talk about what is happening is critical. You pushed back and said, don't talk about hostages' bodies. Speak about deceased hostages. And I notice a difference here between how Israelis talk about hostages and how people around the world talk about them. We talk about, at the moment, 115 hostages, some of whom are dead, some of whom are alive, but they're all hostages. When the Americans speak about a ceasefire deal to get the hostages out, they speak about the remains of hostages. Now, I want to ask you a sensitive question, and please feel free to push back and tell me if it's not appropriate. When people arrive at Ben Gurion Airport, they see the row of posters of the hostages, and as you said, after calling and giving the IDF an earful, Hadar Goldin, Oron Shaul, Avera, and Hisham are listed among the total hostages. And Hadar's poster is there. And I noticed that his age is listed as 32. But he fell in battle as a hero when he was 23. And yet the posters refer to him as if he has aged and grown older since. And I'm sure that's a conscious decision to say that he's 32 and not freeze him in time at the age he fell in battle. And I'm wondering why that is, if you can explain it to me.
You're the first one to ask me this kind of question. I thought
really?
I had all the question in the world, but this one was not. First of all, this question is relevant to all hostages by now.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's relevant to all hostages. Personally, for me, Hadar was left at 23. It's difficult because Hadar is a twin brother. So I'm sure you didn't thought about it. But for me, I have Tzur 33 and Hadar 23. So this is what it is.
Yeah.
I mean,
you were effectively one of the founders of the Hostage Family Forum, because while the hostage-taking crisis is still ongoing, your son Saul calls you and says, you need to help these families organize and work together. And I'm wondering, to what extent the families have been coming to you for advice about what works, what doesn't work. I mean, nothing has worked so far because Hadar is still trapped in Gaza, and about how you cope and how you fight and how you go from being overnight an ordinary, normal, happy family to a capital letter hostage family.
Crazy. It's crazy. I actually, until now, I haven't stopped to think about it. I'm just, continue. It's like, keep on, like riding bicycle, At the beginning, knowing that there are 250 hostages was, for me, for all of my family, was horrible. It's like adding 251 layers to the pain we already have. Now, with the families, it was also a bit difficult. I mean, at the beginning, they were all sure that the hostages will return the next day. Like we've been thinking for 2 years.
I spoke to Mirav Gonen just a few days ago. We were on a television panel together, mother of Romi Gonen.
I know.
I've been in touch with her since very early stages of the war. And she says she remembers going to pick up her daughter's stuff from her sublet and saying, should we pack up her stuff, leave it there? And she's going, oh, but Romi will be home by the end of the week. But you know what? She'll probably want to come and stay with her mother, and she can't. It's been 10 months. They didn't expect that it would last this long, and there's no end in sight.
So for them, they were reluctant. I mean, at the beginning, the first week, they called us. I mean, we talked over the phone. They were in our lists, that the phone began with. And while we were trying to connect to the IDF, to those people that search, it was like, we are going to help solving it. But as they understood, and as things started to be a bit heavy, we became like Sadin Adom, red flag, like saying, we don't want to be in your situation.
Who said that?
Some families.
They don't want to be in your situation.
Yeah,
well,
we are not in your situation. We are different. They try to. I mean, being different is something that a lot is put in it.
Sorry, maybe there's something I'm missing.
Divide and conquer. Do you know the word divide and conquer?
But maybe there's something I'm missing. What do you mean they don't want to be? I mean, obviously, no one wants to be in your situation.
Like, we are different. So. They talk about things that happened 10 years ago. Back to the same thing.
Right.
And here we are in another situation.
Reset. This is a new struggle.
So we know better than you. This was the general theme. Okay. So that was the reason that, following your friend advice, we just took a step backward, not interviewed at all. We gave we let the families go to the media, tell their stories, while the media was more interested in what had happened on October 7, rather than talking about how do we get them back. And this is definitely, we've been at a different state, because I, after 2 years, stopped thinking about what happened and think a lot about how to bring him home. But
presumably when you're talking to these families, you are scarred by 9 years of experience of dealing with the Israeli political system, and you've been scathing about what you understand as the political and business interests in buying quiet and not pushing for a hostage release deal. and also dealing with international organizations, international actors, by whom you feel betrayed. What advice have you been sharing with the hostage families about, listen, this one's a snake, be careful with them, we've been stung by them before?
Not much. They were not listening. And while they were not listening, the general advice they got from the PR team of the forum was sending them all over the world and advising them to tell them their story, tell what happened, creating emotional reaction, hoping that by that they will return their kids home. And this actually for me was very difficult because by October 7, I already knew that emotions are not enough to bring my son home. There are a lot of other things that we already talked that should be done. But while those families actually were sent all over, there was no room for us. Unfortunately, not now, 3 months ago, when they realized that it goes nowhere, they came to me. I mean, we are talking, we are working together.
How have things changed in the strategy?
It's in a process. First of all, the first time we went abroad was in February. We went to Berlin and then to Hague, where Hadar's art exhibition was presented by Christian for Israel as a solidarity for Israel. And that visit for us, from our point at Berlin, was to discuss terror financing, okay? And in The Hague about the same, and how to use international leverage and bring of those European Union and European Parliament, actually, countries, and help bring our hostages home. Now, more than that, it's not that the international leverage that it's obvious that should be used now. You know, just looking at what happens now, what happened against the Iranian attack, what made us succeed was the coalition of all those countries. And I'm eager to see the same coalition acting for the returning of my son.
So let's open this up.
I just, in a moment. But most important thing is what leverage can be used in Israel to return the hostages. And this is very frustrating because what they have been doing for us during the 10 years, they continue to do to others and families with no hesitation.
You feel the government is stringing them along?
Look, a month ago, 50 prisoners, Nukheba, including the manager of Shifa Hospital, were released to Gaza with not even requesting the exchange of our hostages. This is unacceptable. 2 days ago, there was release of 80 bodies of terrorists with not even requesting anything. Now, this is one thing. Look at the lorries going back and forth from Gaza. Everything continues the same way. And I would like to mention here, one of our main achievements here in Israel, before we realized what leverage we have outside Israel, was with the help of Lior Lotan. At that time, he was the coordinator of missing persons, of hostages, was a Israeli cabinet decision on January 1st, 2017. It had 3 points. The first point was that no families from Gaza are allowed, Palestinian families are allowed to visit the Hamas terrorists in jail. Mm-hmm. For that purpose, the Red Cross was supporting all the transportation from Gaza to Israel. The second thing was no family member from Hamas will get medical care in Israel. And they are still. Do you know that Hania's sister had טיפולי פוריות,
fertility treatment?
Yeah. Why? And while we talk now,
sister from Gaza.
From Gaza. And while we talk now, you have a lot of people from Gaza in our hospitals. We went to the Supreme Court. So they blame us that we want to kill the poor woman from Gaza that has cancer. You know? And the third one was that no body of terrorists will be returned to Gaza without precondition return Hadar and Doron. But nothing, and you still...
So this cabinet decision was never actually implemented.
As we talk, these are Israelis' cabinet decisions that are ignored and, in my language, are violated. And I don't know how to say it in English, להכניס אצבע בעין, you know?
They're poking you in the eye.
You do it for hundreds of families. So they come to us to tell me that this is immoral. I say, look, the language is really immoral regarding my son and all hostages returned does not exist because other interests exist. And those interests are much more stronger than any value we've been educated on.
There is an important fight to be had within Israeli society to put pressure on the government to bring them home. Not necessarily to capitulate to Hamas's demands, but to apply the leverage you are saying that Israel can use on the Hamas terror regime in order to bring them home. But I want to talk to you about international leverage, because this is a podcast that aims mainly at an international audience and people who want to know what their countries should be doing to help return the hostages. I've been trying to convince the hostage forum that bring them home is the wrong slogan internationally. We had a rally in Central Park in New York. And I spoke to them. I said, who are you shouting at when you shout bring them home? The joggers in Central Park aren't going to help bring them home, but their government can start acting like a superpower and pressure Hamas to let them go.
Exactly.
And that's where the discussion needs to be. Not to what extent Israel should allow itself to be blackmailed to capitulate to terrorist demands and put our national security at risk in order to get hostages back. And if we have to pay a painful price, we will pay that painful price. But how do you pressure Hamas and its backers, Qatar, Turkey, Iran, and its enablers? You mentioned the European Union because of the amount of money that it has been pumping into.
Donors
and other donor states pumping into UNRWA, which is a Hamas front, to force Hamas to let them go. So I'm wondering, from your 10-year battle to free Hadar, what leverage you think the international community has on Hamas's psychopath leaders to force them to let them go. If the world wants to force Hamas to let them go, what pressure can they put on Qatar, Turkey, Iran, and how should the European Union be changing its own policy to be compliant with its own parliament's resolution saying that a ceasefire should be predicated on a return of all the hostages?
From what I've learned, they have all the leverage in the world to apply with regard to Hamas to return our hostages, and that's what I'm focusing now about hostages, not how to diminish all the terror in the world. Okay, this is not
specifically
this is too big for me.
Specifically, this. What can the United States be doing? What can the European Union be doing to pressure Hamas to let them go?
Start implementing the law and the resolution. Now, implementing it means to start with is first of all go out in public and making it clear that this is unacceptable. Holding the hostages is unacceptable, like the European Parliament did, and call for a ceasefire, provided that all hostages are returned. Okay, this statement should go into the public domain out and loud by each one of them.
No ceasefire until all of them are home.
And by the European Union foreign Borrell, you know, and whoever is in role, you know, all of them should be united in making this statement, because nowadays the media And what we learned from Professor Erwin Kotler, that represents Hadar, he said that a lot of human rights campaigns and fighting success depend on the public awareness and public domain. Now, second thing is just enforce it to all those that at the end of the chain of humanitarian support do agreements with those entities. At the end of the day, having any agreement relevant to energy or relevant to transportation or relevant to any buildings, even Qatar is going to, and Saudi are going to build new neighborhoods in Gaza. All of this should be preconditioned by the hostages' return. And my wish that, even it doesn't go, if it doesn't succeed in every agreement, to begin with, if this will be on the agenda of all those business people, they know how to implement in every agreement guarantees, Guarantees. They have guarantees for everything. So this should be one of the guarantees.
I'm asking Liz specifically because there are people who are going to be watching us. No, but this is exactly what I want to explore, because there are people who are going to be watching and saying, right, I am writing a letter to my member of parliament, to my congressperson right now, and I'm going to demand a certain action from them to put pressure on Hamas to let them go. And I'm wondering what specific levers you have mapped out and say, you need to demand this, you need to stop this. What do they need to do to Qatar, to Turkey, to Iran?
I'm not stopping anything. I cannot stop anything. We cannot stop the world from going on and doing agreements and building and doing things. We don't stop anything. We just say it's about time to incorporate the hostages' return as a confidence-building measure, as a precondition, as a guarantee in everything around us, because now it's my
in everything to do with Gaza and the provision of trade and what you call goodies into the Gaza Strip.
This is what's going on the legal side of things.
No, I just want to be very specific, because there are people now who are watching who are going to be typing letters to their Congress people as we speak, and we want to tell them what they should say. They should be demanding that any provision of aid, any expansion of trade, any reconstruction in the post-war period should all be explicitly linked to a return of all the hostages as a confidence-building measure, because as you've been saying, humanitarian law has to be reciprocal. It can't work only in the benefit of the terrorists. And as much as the Palestinians have weaponized international law, hostage families have rights under international law, and that the return of missing persons must be a confidence-building measure. It's not a luxury, like the cars are a luxury. This is critical point for people to understand.
Now, the other thing, which is go to the illegal thing, is the terror financing. A couple of months ago, 4 months ago, it was published at the New York Times about the Hamas terror financing network. Now, terror financing is a well-known thing, and it flourishes all over the world. It flourishes in Israel. It flourishes everywhere. Now, since October 7, and on 2020, we went to Germany with our President Rivlin. It was 75 years for the release in Auschwitz. And we've met at that time the foreign minister of Germany, Heiko Maas, which previously was justice minister. And he said, we know what to do, because we use the leverage of terror financing against Hezbollah, telling them you are not going to get our support unless you do 1, 2, 3.
And so the critical factor here is to be able to choke off the terrorists' funding and mapping out how Hamas has been funding itself.
No, it's not just a terror financing. When you talk about Hezbollah, it was the same. They had a military part and
a military wing and a political wing.
they play
right.
between themselves. Okay. So they knew how to handle it. Now, since October 7th...
So you're saying, I just want to understand, mechanisms for fighting terror financing already exist around the world. They simply have to be transplanted onto Hamas. And I think the decision to appoint Yahya Sinwar as the leader of the Hamas Politburo has blurred any lines that people might try to have made between the so-called political wing and the military wing, exactly. As if you could say that Osama bin Laden was the head of the political wing of Al-Qaeda, right? So there's a question of terror financing, and among that is, for example, the way that UNRWA has been laundering money, cracking down on cryptocurrencies, on drugs smuggling networks. These are questions that people have to bring to the attention of their governments. Leah, before we wrap up, people will be watching us who have for 10 months now, and 10 years, in fact, been going blue in the face, trying to fight for the hostages' freedom. They are wearing the hostage dog tags. They are wearing the hostage pins. They are going to protests in their local communities, and they're putting up hostage posters when they get ripped down. And they want to help. So I want to give you an opportunity now to talk to the people who are watching on YouTube, listening on the podcast platforms, who want to know, what else can I do to help bring the hostages home? What do you want them to do to help you?
My request is from anyone that is watching me, is please become our ambassadors. We need you as our ambassadors wherever you go. Wherever you go, remember, now it's my son captured by the Hamas, but you by now you know in every country what is the problem of Islamic extremists. You know it in Germany, you know it in the Netherlands, you know it in the United States, you know it in London, you know it. So as long as they keep Hadar, and it's already 10 years, this terror entity wins and we lose and we give in to terror. We need you as ambassadors to say, this is unacceptable. This is unacceptable. All the hostages, and my son should be the first because we are the senior one. They should come home. They should be released. Let them go. And we need you as ambassadors wherever you go, because what I learned from my mother, and I'm a second-generation Holocaust survivor, whatever you can do in your circle can help. Because everyone has its own circle, the first one, the second one. And I believe that each person in the world, from the second circle and on, has influence. And you can use media, you can everything, but don't get stuck in October 7 in pitying us. Don't pity me. I don't need you, and I keep saying, I don't need anyone to wipe my tears. I have a lot of help in that. We need you, help them be released and free them. So this is what we need. We need a lot of ambassadors all over the world. You know, because last time I was I met 5 members of the in The Hague from the European Parliament. I was with my son, and when I can tell Hadar's story in 1 minute, you know, that he was killed in a ceasefire, blah, 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 blah. And then we had a discussion, and when we finished, this parliament member said, I'm very moved by your story. And my reaction to him was, I didn't tell you any story. It's my reality. I'm not a storyteller. And I think this is the mistake that all those families had during the 10 years. You know, in a way, they were misled by a lot of PR that is feeding, you know, our media, trying to to create emotions. Emotions are not enough to return our hostages. This is my experience. We have to do more, as you said.
We've never gotten anywhere by demanding the world's sympathy, relying on its kindness. And to me, it's especially heartbreaking to hear that Hadar was a third-generation Holocaust survivor. And so many years after the Nazi genocide in Europe, he fell in battle trying to fight for what is our basic right, which is to live free and safe in our homeland. Leah Goldin, we started the episode. You told me that you have the priestly blessing written on the hostage dog tag. I'm not a Cohen, but I'll repeat the words of the ancient prayer that may God keep you safe and protect you, shine his light and his face on you, and bring us all peace. Leah Goldin,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And that brings us to the end of today's very difficult and heavy episode of State of a Nation with Leah Goldin, mother of fallen soldier Hadar Goldin, who is still held in the Hamas terror dungeons 10 years after the 2014 war with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Please follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Give us a like, give us a 5-star review, and please, please share the episodes, especially this one, with your friends, with your family. Keep crying out the cry of the hostages, and never stop fighting until we bring them all home and force Hamas to let them go now. Every single one. I'm Elon Levy, and thanks for watching.